Hey everybody, welcome back to the Magical Jill channel. It's Jay, Jill's husband, and this is not my channel, but occasionally I do have my own videos on here, which I appreciate. And today we're talking about Sailor Moon. Now, I am very passionate about Sailor Moon, and two of my favorite anime ever are both from kinda the same era, which is Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball. Now, obviously the original Dragon Ball started before Sailor Moon, but you know what I mean. There was kind of that peak era of anime that came to the West from Japan, and it was getting pretty bad dubs, but it was those gateway animes that were introducing people to the genre, like Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, Pokemon. There's a lot of them, right? And this article that I found, it essentially calls the Sailor Moon 90s series completely unwatchable for multiple reasons. And I find this really sad because the article is from CBR. Please do not contact the author. I have no idea if they stand by their opinion, if they wrote this, just to fill up space and sell ad revenue. I don't know. But I always ask you not to contact them. It's not worth it. And a lot of these people want to be called out so that they get more attention. So I will leave the source in the description down below. But the way that the author wrote this was that these are 10 classic 90s anime that are unwatchable today. And they went through and applied today's standards to many of these things. Sailor Moon didn't get as much of the brunt of that. A lot of this was, I would say, political standards and standards of stories in terms of things they think are or are not acceptable. And I do think there can be room for that. If you really want to look at something and you're like, oh wow, the amount of racism in this makes me really uncomfortable. Maybe this isn't for me. Or, oh wow, there was some weird stuff going on here with child stars in this show back then because the age of consent was different, and this is weird to me. There's things you can be uncomfortable with or not want to watch, I get it. But to call something just unwatchable to everybody because you don't like the way it's written because of today's standards, I think is very narrow-minded and just kind of weird. So we're going to take a look at this with Sailor Moon, but I do have a question of the day for you, which is, how do you feel about the idea of media aging? For me, there are certain things that can take me out of things. Like if the effects of something were really, really rough at the time, maybe that's a little immersion breaking. But for the most part, I can go back, I can read a classic novel. Even classic American novels had a lot of racism in them. You can still get stuff out of it, and you can still understand the lessons from it without necessarily embracing every aspect, right? But for some reason, there is now this idea, especially among these journalists online, that you cannot do that. Like, if something has a bad nugget in it or a negative to it, it needs to be completely thrown out. Or if there's some problem with the author from the time it was made, even if it was hundreds of years ago, it needs to be completely thrown out. And so they're applying story structure and ideas from the modern day to Sailor Moon, essentially going through it and saying that the original Sailor Moon anime has 200 episodes, and that's maybe a slog for many to get through, but this doesn't change the fact that the aesthetic is immaculate, saying that some people prefer to distill 90s Sailor Moon down to screenshots and visuals that highlight the character's impeccable fashion and the anime's inspired use of color. Much like with Dragon Ball Z and Kai, many fans argue that Sailor Moon's unnecessary filler and laborious padding is part of what made them fall in love with the series in the first place. So there's already a lot of loaded language here, basically saying it's unnecessary and laborious, but you like it because it's bad. I've never really liked when people word things this way. It reminds me of Mean Girls in school, where it's like, oh, of course you would have that makeup, you're poor. Like you hear people talk to each other, or some guy who's like, oh, of course you're still on the PS4, like I'm on the PS5 and I got a new Corvette. It's like people who find ways to talk down to you while sounding nice is what this article comes off as, but went on to say, many fans prefer Sailor Moon to Sailor Moon Crystal, even though the latter is better paced and technically superior as a series, which is odd to me. I'm not hating on Sailor Moon Crystal, but in terms of technically superior and these things you're saying, the art animation for the first few of those seasons was pretty rough. I believe around season 3, Sailor Moon Crystal actually started to look really good, and then it transitioned to films with Eternal and Cosmos. There's also a lot of complaints about not only the Sailor Moon manga, which I also enjoy, but Sailor Moon Crystal for not getting into more world building, for not getting into more things with the villains. You know, this person complaining about essentially, the filler and things like that. They're saying, well, this doesn't make the original Sailor Moon any more watchable. It's an anime that's steeped in issues that make it more enjoyable in concept than execution. And my thing is, I don't really know what they mean by that, because I would just say, well, they're just talking about filler. But if you look through this article, they essentially go into different anime here in general. Like, for example, one anime, they basically say that it's bad because it uses tropes that are in the industry, even though like a lot of tropes have developed since the 90s. Like, people copy old anime and their formats. They go through different anime and say, oh, it's bad because of the creator doing this or saying this. There's just a lot of very, very weird takes in this article. So even if we just boil it down to filler, which I don't think is all they meant, because this person does seem very ideologically driven, it doesn't actually make any sense in terms of criticizing this anime and not others for it. Like, for example, this person brings up Dragon Ball Z right here in this article, right? Dragon Ball Z is packed to the brim with filler, but some of the best episodes, like some of the most fun things that happen, are like Goku and Piccolo going to get a driver's license. And you know why that is? Because it expands the world. It gives you more interactions between those characters. It gives you more things going on instead of the plot jumping from villain to villain. And that's actually a problem, that some people do have with Dragon Ball Z Kai, is they say, okay, well, I like that it's cut down. I like that it's more to the point, but there's also some things that they lost that were really good in what was considered filler, right? And the same thing does happen with Sailor Moon. You look at the way people feel about it, when you're calling it technically superior for Crystal, and you have animation issues, basically up the wall for those first couple of seasons because it didn't have enough of a budget, or you're saying, oh, well, it's better because it's cut down and more to the point. Sailor Moon herself, Usagi, is just rolling through villains very quickly in the original manga and in Crystal. A lot of villains don't get the time to fully develop because the focus was on Sailor Moon and the Guardians. And it makes sense for a manga because you're trying to get to the point, you're trying to move it along. Unless you're one of these super long running manga like Naruto or One Piece or something like that, you obviously are trying to just get through the stories, not in the way of like thinking they're disposable, but getting from point to point and telling a story without wasting the reader's time. But the thing is with TV shows, when it comes to anime, they were often catching up with or even getting past the manga creators and where they were at with their story. And that was a problem, right? So they would catch up to the manga because they started the anime to capitalize off of the manga's success at the time. And then they'd catch up and then they wouldn't know what to do. And that's where a lot of filler came from, was to slow down story progression, build up the world, all these different things. And instead of taking anything for what it was, it led to all these debates with things like Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon about canon and what's okay and what isn't, what applies to what. And then you have people like this coming in years later and saying, oh, well, it's not watchable because the story doesn't progress quickly enough. I did teaching for a long time, and I actually have been considering going back to it as well. It's a brief aside. But this is something I saw a lot with children. They want cliff notes. They want spark notes. They want things to go quick to the next point. It's this weird mindset that outside of being diagnosed with ADHD does not make much sense to me. It's okay to say, I don't have time for this story. It's too long. I have too much going on in my life. That's fine. That's kind of how I personally feel about something like Naruto and the anime about his son. I personally feel like I don't really have time for that. I'm already into Dragon Ball. That's a long enough anime for me, and I have a lot of other interests. That's okay, but I wouldn't ask Naruto to change, right? And I wouldn't call it unwatchable. I have my problems with the episodes I did watch, and I have things I liked with the episodes I did watch, but I wouldn't go and call it unwatchable. There's millions of people who love it. That would be such a douchey thing to say. And if I were to say, oh, well, the reason they like it is because it's bad. You know, they've argued that just like how One Piece takes too long, it taking too long and being shitty is part of the reason why they like it. It's this condescending idea, and I always see it from Western authors about Eastern works. And I'm someone who champions the idea of you should be able to have an opinion on a story no matter where it comes from. If someone's writing a story in Siberia and you live in Australia, you absolutely should be able to have and voice an opinion on that. And I do think that good authors within reason listen. I truly do. You know, if you're ripping into their story, like Game of Thrones, the last season's terrible, right? Most people hate it. Well, unfortunately, the way that was produced, there was no course correcting once it went wrong. But with video games, long-running anime, a lot of these things, one of the things that separates the best creators from the most out of touch is that they do listen sometimes. Not always, but they will listen. You know, people like Tetsuya Nomura with Kingdom Hearts, they'll listen and they'll say, people want to see this character back. People like Akira Toriyama with Dragon Ball, they'll listen and they'll say, oh, people don't like that all these characters became irrelevant as Z went on. I should fix that in Dragon Ball Super. That's one of the things that's good. I love people voicing their opinions. I love authors listening to those things and kind of coming together with the fans to make something even better, no matter where the fans are from. That's fantastic. Love that. But I hate when people take something, especially when it's like Western journalists, you know, who just want everything to conform exactly to them. All characters have to be like them. They have to have the same character traits as that person. They have to tick this box, and this box. These journalists come in and they tell you your thing is bad, everybody who likes it is stupid, you like it because it's bad and you have bad taste, and I'm right. It's from a place of narcissism, in my opinion. It truly is, because these people think that everybody else has to be like them, and every story has to be the way they want it, and I just find it to be a gross mindset. So I wanted to know your thoughts on it down below. I personally like both versions of this story, you know, whether it's the original Sailor Moon or Crystal or the manga actually too. I like both versions of Dragon Ball, whether it's Z, and yes, there are some things that go slow that I might fast forward through a little bit, but I also love Z Kai, and that's okay. You know, it didn't have to change completely for me. If you enjoyed this video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, we appreciate you so much. There are ways to support all of our channels. You know, if you liked me on here, I got other videos on here too. I'm in videos with Jill. I have my own channels in the description. We have our own Fortnite code, which goes to help support all of our channels. And we have Jill's store, CosmoBunny.shop. This is one of my favorite things ever. Jill is always making new stock for this, and I think she's going to be making some new stuff as well. Going into the holiday season here, coasters, keychains, trays, and more, all made from recycled comic book and manga and magazine paper, books that have been damaged. We take those things, we transform them into something new, in a new medium, one-of-a-kind art pieces for your home, coasters, keychains, trays, and more, using resin and recycling the rest of that paper that we can't use. We never print images, it's always one-of-a-kind items that we get directly from the source and create by hand. So we appreciate you so much. Code SAILOR gets you 10% off your first purchase over there. Love you guys. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.